Dougal. Is that on? Yep, there we go. Thank you, Dougal. Put my phone away. Well, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. We're nearly at the end of James. We've got this sermon, and then next week we're going to have a look at some themes that have run through all of our series in James, and try to understand what it is that we might take out of that. Sometimes it's easy to complicate these passages and to look for the complexity that exists, and we've seen in James that actually quite often that's been true. However, I think today's one, as James comes to conclude this letter, he's in proper practical mode, and so the goal is to keep this reasonably simple. We don't need to decipher what it is that he's trying to say. He says 4 things. He says, be patient. He says, have integrity. He says, have faith and pray. And he says, keep one another on the right track. Pretty simple. There we go. We can all go home and have our Sunday lunch now. If you've been a Christian any length of time, you know these themes. These are not unfamiliar ideas to us. And yet, they're not the easiest to live out, are they? They are quite challenging. And I think this is why James finishes all that he's had to say with these words. He wants to encourage these Christian brothers and sisters to be able to live out the faith that they have been called to, and to do it well. So let's look at these 4 ideas. First, patience. Of all of the points today, it seems James is inspired by Jesus' teaching, specifically the stuff that we see recorded in Matthew. And there's actually a whole sermon where we could go through and pair up huge chunks of James with huge chunks of Matthew and say, look, James is simply reflecting Jesus' teaching. But for each of today's, I just want to point quickly to where in Matthew you can find that. And if you're part of a small group this week, then you'll get the chance to have a bit of a longer look at this. But in the patience one, Matthew 24, verse 13, if we were to look there, we would see, if I put my little marker on the right page, we would see that Jesus, when teaching about the end times, again, a theme that we'll touch around today, says, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. That perseverance mattered to Jesus, and it matters to James. And for James, he cloaks it in this idea of patience. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. It is an amazing challenge for us in this day and age, a day and age of instant gratification, where we get what we want now, for us to be told to be patient. I saw this photograph this week, and it made me chuckle. There's enough of us in the room that will remember this. This is a bunch of men who've been out shopping, probably with their wives, trying to find the football scores at 5:30 on a Saturday. Like today, that means glued to your phones, like refresh, what's the score? But back in the day, we had to be more patient. We had to wait until the teletext came up on the Dixon's window so that we could see what the football scores were, and we could queue in around other people. But not today. We get everything now, which I think has led to us wanting everything now. And so patience is a deep challenge for us. John Mark Comer says, patience is contrary to human nature. We're not commanded to do things that are natural and we would do anyway. Rather, we're commanded to do things which are against our ordinary nature. Patience is contrary to human nature. So even if we didn't live in this age of technological genius, it would be a challenge for us to be patient. But we do live in this moment. And so whether it's Amazon, where we can go, oh, I don't have that thing, that's fine, I'll go and click on a couple of buttons and it will arrive at my door tomorrow morning. Like, in all of history, something like that has just been unfathomable, and yet we don't think about it. We just get our phones out, we click a couple of buttons, and it's done. Or Google Maps. We used to have to plan a route to where we were going. Today, we just punch it in, get in the car, and start following the little blue arrow. I was in Glasgow yesterday, and in an area about 2 miles from where we used to live, and I realized I'm just driving around following the blue arrow. I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea which street I was on. Nothing. Like, what's happened? Those of you who have the joy of working in digital spaces will know that the miraculous thing of Teams or Google Calendars means that you're sitting there and you think, I've got the afternoon, I can catch up on those emails or those readings, and then up pings the little magic button that says so-and-so's just put a meeting in for you, and everyone's excited because we can do it now. We didn't need to book it in for next week or tomorrow. We can sit and talk now. Everyone loves that, don't they? Technology is the opposite of patient. It drives everything to now. And while that may make for high-performing teams, I want to have an argument with you about that, but at least in theory, you get high-performing teams. It's easy to run things, and business can run smoothly and quickly. It is, however, contrary to good discipleship. Alan Kreider writes, I will contend that the Christian's habitus, so Christian habits of behavior, were formed patiently, unhurriedly, through careful catechesis, learning, as well as through the community's behavior, and that it was renewed in the regular worship of the Christian assemblies. What he's saying is that patience was at the very heart of what it meant for Christian discipleship to take place. You see, there's no Amazon button you can press that orders up gentleness. There's no Teams meeting that you can hop on that means that when you come off, you will be bearing even more good fruit for Jesus. That there's no Google Maps button that you can click that means it will take you on the way that God has called you to go. These things are formed with patience, with slow repetition, with regular worship in Christian assembly, as Kreider puts it. Patience matters. We're going to return to patience. I've been kind of provoked a little about it by this book, but also, so we're going to do some stuff on Sabbath and patience in the new year. But what is it that we are patient until, according to James? And he says here, until the coming of the Lord. And I think that's interesting because it begins to point to the fact that our time scales are not the same as God's time scales. Or as the Old Testament puts it, his ways are higher than our ways. And so James then takes this idea and looks at the agrarian culture of the day, and he says, see how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. He says, look around you. You can see that this is true. You have to be patient. You can't just put carrot seed in the ground one day and carrots pop up the next day. We have forgotten this. At least those of us that are my age and younger who grew up in cities, I don't care when. I could not tell you what the seasonal growth time of a carrot is. I just go to Tesco's and there's carrots in the shelves. Right? Frankly, I don't even remember when strawberries properly grow, because there's always strawberries on the shelves. Don't strawberries grow all year round? Well, it does seem that that's the case if we're happy to import our food from all over. But James lived in a time when that wasn't true. You had to tend the ground and wait for your seeds to become whatever it was that they were to become. There was no hurrying that up. They had to patiently wait. And I think it's an interesting observation to say that the farmer doesn't just put the seeds in the ground and then go away and have a wee seat for 6 months and then come back and pick it all up. Patient waiting is not laziness that means that we can go and have a seat and just wait for everything else to happen. It's active. Those of you who are gardeners, you all know gardening, not my thing, right? Not even a small amount. But I observe gardeners, and people with beautiful gardens are incredible people because there's a patience to it that means that sometimes you have to get down on your hands and knees and dig out all these little weeds. Other times you have to get your lawnmower out and cut the grass, and then you need your little sidey thing that cuts. You can tell I'm a really good gardener, right? Your sidey thing that cuts that you need to put the right fertilizer down to be able to make sure that the things grow properly. You have to have put them in the ground at the right time. You have to make sure that the right things are tied to the right stalks. You can tell I know nothing about what I'm talking about here. But people who garden like that understand patience. But what it's not is just shoving stuff in the ground and sitting back and waiting to see what happens. It's really active. So too with our faith. It's not simply, oh, I've done a thing, now I can just sit back and wait for Jesus to come back. No, patient waiting means cultivating the soil of our hearts. Patient waiting means planting different things at the right season in our lives. And James says, even in suffering, we've to be patient. In the face of suffering, we trust God. Many of us don't suffer in most of the ways that our brothers and sisters around the world suffer. But we encounter struggles and trials, and those are real and shouldn't be diminished. In fact, they're so significant for James that he's not only finishing his book with this question of patience in the face of suffering, but he started the book. Do you remember that? Right at the beginning, in chapter 1, verse 12, he's talking about patient endurance in the face of suffering. Why do we patiently wait? Why do we wait for the coming of the Lord? Because he's good. You see, it doesn't make sense if God's not good. Why would you patiently endure in the face of suffering if the one who to come is a vindictive, far-off, angry God? Why would you hang on in the face of great suffering if there was not hope at the other end? This, friends, is the reason we can patiently endure. I don't know why a gardener takes their one day off to till the soil and to make sure that the right things have gone in the ground at the right time. But I suspect it's because there's a hope that one day it won't just be muddy soil, but there's going to be beautiful roses or chrysanthemums or whatever and there will be a beauty there, right? Otherwise, maybe it's just because they like playing in the mud or something like that. It's a grown-up children's game. But I suspect it's because there's hope that there will be something beautiful. And friends, it's the same for us. Why do we persevere? Why do we patiently keep going? Because there's a hope that one day, there will be something so beautiful we have not words to describe it. James says, that's as the day, the coming of the Lord. You see, it's easy sometimes, says Tom Wright, to think of God as remote, uncaring, or unfeeling. Or if we think of him as feeling anything, it's that he's cross or annoyed with us. But James is convinced that God's mercy is sovereign, And this is the deepest truth about God, that he is indeed good. And so James makes the case. It is wise for us to patiently endure. The next point, integrity. Don't worry, that first one was by far the longest one. It's okay, we don't have 4 of the same length. You're like, oh man, it's going to be a long one this morning. Don't worry about it. James then takes this idea of patient endurance in the light of God's goodness, and he suggests that how we speak matters. Now, we've been in James long enough that this is not a surprise to us anymore, is it? He keeps doing this movement of you should do this, you should do this. And the tongue is the core of whether you've got this or not. Because what you speak shows what's in your heart. And so this one has this slightly odd, quirky little phrase. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. Now, does that seem a little odd to you? I don't know. I put you all to sleep. It felt really odd to me. I was like, why does this matter? And I think it is this issue of integrity. And of course, he's echoing very clearly Jesus' teaching in Matthew chapter 5, verses 34 to 37. And what he's doing here, I think, is saying, look, if you add an oath or some other similar embellishment to what you're saying, it has the effect of debasing what you've said. It makes it look as though, well, if I don't swear by God, then I'm probably lying. But if I swear by God, then it's only at that moment that you can trust what I'm saying. And our courts do this, right? So we walk into court and they say, do you swear on the Bible or swear on God that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? As though as if you didn't swear on it, you were going to tell some big pile of porky pies. And James says, no, don't do that. Just be known as someone who, when he speaks, or when she speaks, says the thing that they know to be true. And that's the end of it. Be known as someone who speaks there. It is wise, James says, to speak plainly. Let your yes be yes and your no by no. No need to embellish it. No need to make it something else it's not. Because by embellishing it and making it something it's not, you actually undermine your regular speech. Just be known as someone who's trustworthy. Offer prayer in faith. Can I have my water? Sorry. I've got a little straw on this one. I always feel slightly childish drinking out of it. But the problem is the other one's got a big hole, and I'm always worried about drinking out of that, is I'm going to pour it down my front. And then not only will I have dirty jeans, which Karen has been pointing out to me since the instant I sat down up here. She's been going like this. You should clean your thing. Now, I want you to know that they're like that because I was on my knees praying for you all before you got here. It has nothing to do with the fact I had to climb up there and fix the TVs 10 minutes before the service started. Okay, prayer in faith. This is a brilliant little section that we could be here forever with. And I'm really looking forward to my small group this week because there's loads of super controversial stuff in this little bit that people will pick up and have a fight about. It'll be great fun, and we can figure out what it means to follow Jesus in the midst of this little strange section. I didn't spill it. And again, I think we can see that James is echoing Matthew's description of what Jesus says in Matthew 21 to 22. But I think there's two things that come out of this little section in verses 13 to 18. And that is this. It's that prayer matters and that faith matters. That those two things are true. But I want us to remember that James has just been talking about the fact that God is compassionate and merciful. This is the context in which we begin to pray. The people that we're about to read about here are not somehow magical folks, not the elders that are called to pray or anyone else. Indeed, James wants to make the point that we're just like Elijah. And why are we like Elijah? Because Elijah was just a human being. There was nothing fancy about Elijah. He was just an ordinary dude who prayed to an extraordinary God who was able to do immeasurably more than Elijah could have ever hoped for. Just a human being. But what happens is that it seems like in the behavior and the patterns of the church, if things are happening, whether it's trouble, happiness, sickness, we're to pray. This is what God asks us to do. And he seems to have James has some specific ways that he thinks we should do that. So if you're in trouble, let them pray, the idea being to seek God. If anyone's happy, let them sing songs of praise. Our worship on a Sunday morning when we sing together, we're not just singing to one another. We are doing that. We're singing to God as though that matters. We're singing for ourselves. It's good for our souls. Psychiatrists right now are doing loads of work about the fact that it's really good for us to sing collectively, right? It's like, yeah, well, we've known that a little while, but anyway, it's good that that's catching up, and they're saying this is something that we understand to be good. In fact, we had a visitor here a few weeks ago who started talking to me about emotions and how they work with singing and music, and it was very interesting, and I understood about 3 sentences of it, because he's doing a PhD in it, and he was one of those people who got really excited about his subject, and I was like, I'm now gone. But it matters for us to sing. If we're happy, sing praise to God. If you're sick, what do? You call the elders of the church to pray over them, anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. Now, let's just be honest here, right? Because there's one way to read this text that says, everyone that the elders gather round and pray for and anoint with oil is going to get better, right? We could read it that way. Has anyone experienced that 100% of the time? We don't. Has anyone experienced that any of the time? Yes. So, I become a pragmatist at this point. And what do I mean by that? I mean, some people get healed some of the time, so I will pray for everyone all of the time, because I don't know who's going to get healed. And the thing that breaks my heart as a pastor is I never have an answer for the why not. James offers one here, one part of it, and there's obviously a much bigger conversation to have around this whole area, but James, he now ties it to, therefore confess your sins. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. So he ties illness to sin. I want to be really careful here, so I need you to pay attention for a second. I am not saying, and James is not saying, that every illness is related to sin. The Bible does not say that. However, sometimes sin leads to illness. Sometimes, hence the if in that statement. And so we need to recognize that that's true, that sometimes there is sin to be repented of, and therefore when we then pray, healing will come, because forgiveness is a big part of the healing. The word that's used for healing here is the Greek word sozo, which is often translated as salvation. And so there's a wholeness to healing that is much more than just our physical bodies. Remember that rose that we talked about? The reason the gardener patiently does it is for the beauty that's to come. The beauty that's coming with the coming of the Lord is that all things will be made well. Sometimes this side of heaven. But the other thing I know is that if the Lord doesn't come back, you will still die, even if you're healed of your thing. Right? The decay of the world is inescapable. Okay? So we must be careful that we don't end up saying a few things. One, that this says everyone should be healed. It doesn't say that. I wish it did. It doesn't say that. But we must not allow that to dampen our faith or our trust in God, because sometimes people are healed. It also doesn't say that all illness is related to sin. We must not say that. But we can say sometimes illness and sin are related, and we must deal with that. That make sense? Yeah? And so let us be filled with faith. And I need, our risk and my risk is not that I will be too filled with faith, that I will be too expectant of God, right? I've been listening to an album that on Spotify that's kind of from the Black Gospel tradition. And there's a couple of songs on there that are really about calling down the name of God and just saying, this will happen. And kind of what sounds like name it and claim it stuff that makes me really uncomfortable. And yet I want to learn from my brothers and sisters from other traditions who are saying to us, no, we can rely on God to do remarkable things. And our risk, I think, is too often we just don't expect enough of God. We don't ask enough of God. And so I want us to read this passage and feel provoked to say, let's just ask for a few more things. Maybe if we prayed for a few more people to be healed, we might get one more person healed, which would be a great thing. And yes, you can then just leave me to scrape up the pastoral mess of the people who didn't get healed, right? We'll deal with that. We'll just have to figure that out, friends. I would love it to be that we all got healed. It's just not true. But some do. And so let us have faith that this remarkable God works in ways that we cannot comprehend. And sometimes people will be healed. Because what do we know about God from James? He's compassionate and merciful. He is good. Let's expect good things from him. Tom Wright says this, heaven and earth meet when in the Spirit someone calls on the name of the Lord. Or as James puts it, the prayer of the righteous person is powerful and effective. The person praying, I love this, listen to this. The person praying, the person praying stands with one foot in the place of trouble, sickness, and sin, and with the other foot in the place of healing, forgiveness, and hope. And then prayer brings the latter to bear on the former. This place of hope, this place of forgiveness and healing is where we stand and we pray towards the sickness and sin and trouble and illness of this world. The prayer offered in faith has profound impact. The world is changed when you pray. Someone said, if we could convince everyone in the church just to pray for 20 minutes a day, everybody in the whole world, do we believe that the whole place would be shifted? And I think we have to answer yes. And I don't know how that works, because it can't be that we simply say, well, if enough of us pray about one thing, then God will suddenly change his mind and do something because he wasn't listening when only one person was praying. James says the prayer of a person, a righteous person, is powerful and effective. And yet at the same time, it does seem that when we gather together and where God's people agree things on earth, that God does something from heaven. And so in the mystery of all of that, may we be people that seek God with faith in prayer. It is wise to pray. It is wise to speak plainly. It is wise to patiently endure. Perhaps we could wrap these three ideas up with the statement, wisdom is trusting God. Wisdom is trusting God. I think that's what James is leading us to. And then we finish with this strange little bit at the end. My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring the person back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. Another Jesus-inspired thought, Matthew 18:15, carries this idea. James, it seems to me, is finishing off with a flourish. This is the end of it. There's not for him the pleasant greetings of Pauline letters where he says, oh, greet this person and that person and say thank you to that person for their hard work and this person for putting so-and-so up and all that kind of stuff. None of that for him. He is concerned that people would take all that he has done and actually all that he's taught and put it in practice. And this time is a reminder that not only should the readers or hearers of James's instructions be concerned for their own doing of what he has exhorted them towards, but they are, in the spirit of the royal law, to be concerned with others also doing as James has exhorted them. In other words, because James's whole thing is built around this royal law that do unto others, right? That the idea that you would have listened to all of James and heard from him the remarkable nature of what it is to be a follower of Jesus, and the idea that you wouldn't then pursue your brother or sister who is walking away from the faith, James is like, you can't do that. Of course, if you get this, if this means something to you, then you are going to pursue your brother and sister that they also might live in the same way, and that they won't go astray, because that is the only loving thing to do. And with this, James just ends his letter. The end. Clunk. No yours faithfully, yours sincerely, or anything else like that. The end. Next week, we'll have a reminder of what we've seen, all the various wisdoms, and some of the key themes that we've seen run through the book. But this week, I think the exhortation to us is this. Live wisely by trusting God through patient trust, plain speaking, and faith-filled prayer, with concern not only for yourself, but for your brothers and sisters in the faith. Let me say that again. Live wisely, friends, by trusting God through patient trust, plain speaking, and faith-filled prayer, with concern not only for yourself, but also for your brothers and sisters in the faith. Let's pray. Father, we choose to trust in you. We thank you for this book of James that has provoked us, has probably annoyed us, that has led us in ways of thinking that are new and some that are old. But we recognize that all that he has taught us is difficult to put into practice, and so we need your help. Spirit of the living God, would you come and fill us now